Namaskar. Welcome to PGurus channel, and today Sridhar Chityala ji and I will take a critical look at Modi's 7 years at the helm of affairs in India. We are going to take a look at it from a GDP, PPP, and development parameters, primarily economic and development parameters. How has this ride been? What is the data that supports our observations? And where do we see India going from here? To get us this database perspective, Sridhar Chityala ji has put together a lot of information via tables and charts, which we are going to share in the process of this conversation. Sridhar ji, namaskar and welcome to PGurus channel.
Namaskar, good morning, and very happy to present the economic and development data, and it's going to be fairly interesting within the context of analyzing it in a non-political context, and the data speaks for itself in terms of the progress.
And viewers, we are going to differentiate between nominal GDP and GDP as computed as PPP, that is purchasing power parity, the differences, everything. I mean, we are going to really give you an economics perspective, perhaps a little bit of a lesson also to how to compare countries and so on and so forth. So Sridhar ji, let's take a look at what was happening in 2014 when Modi ji came to power. India was, going lurching from scandal after scandal after scandal, and it was clear that the UPA will not win. That much was clear. Nobody knew if the UPA would fall so badly that the NDA, that is of which Modi ji's BJP is the dominant partner, would get an absolute majority. So that's what happened in 2014. So, sir, take it away from here. With your permission, I'll put the first slide, which is the India's gross domestic product in current prices from 1986 to 2026. Sir, your turn.
Great, thank you so much, sir. So if you take a look at this specific chart, what it tells you is it almost took 60 years for India to hit the first $1 trillion GDP number. That occurred somewhere in 2006, 2008 timeline when you look at the graph. So one can ask, cast aspersions as to what's the reason. Well, socialism, closed economy, most of the capital controls, capital restrictions, etc. This is notwithstanding the fact that the liberalization began to happen in 1991. The economy began to accelerate, but not at a pace that one would desire. It's the same UPA which actually took on the reins and added another 400 billion in the time period between 2006 to 2014 when Modi took over. So almost 8 years, another $400 billion was added to the GDP. And when Modi came in, it was around $1.4 trillion. So I think we were at least on an upward curve when you look at the chart. In the 7 years, if Modi has taken the GDP, doubled it. So he has taken it to about $3.1 trillion as Sree nominal GDP. He has taken it to, is doubled it to $3 trillion, $3.1 trillion. If you normalize, if you exclude the pandemic contraction of 8% or 7.4%, as the case may be, then you would see that if you discount it, then India would very much have been a $3.4, $3.5 trillion economy with an aspirational goal of hitting that $5 trillion well on the way, growing around 8 to 10%. It did hit 8%, and then it pulled back during those intervening years. And so that's a setback. But when you take a look at the chart, which goes up to 2026, India would be around $4.6 trillion of economy. And it is not outside the realms that India would achieve its goal of $5 trillion somewhere in the 2027. So clearly the GDP, which has been one of the numbers that has been touted and talked about, this is nominal GDP. But often India also refers to what we call as the PPP, purchasing power parity calculated slightly differently, which is what is the effective value of $1 in terms of purchasing terms when you put it in rupee. So then when you look at the PPP numbers, the PPP numbers are even more compelling when we take a look at those numbers. So again, when Modi ji took over, it was $6.7 trillion. He's taken it to about $8.7 trillion. This was actually moving towards the 10 trillion mark. In fact, in 2019, the Indian PPP, calculated as PPP GDP, was $9.54 trillion until the contraction of 9% occurred in the 2020 timeline as a result of the pandemic. India uses a different financial year. Here we use calendar year for the purposes of calculation of GDP, which is normalized. Usually we use IMF or World Bank data, which normalizes by calendar year, but India goes by financial FY, where the financial year finishes in March 31st. So even if we take the PPP numbers, the numbers are quite, what shall I say, compelling, and positions the aspirational desire of India to be one of the top 5 economic players. On PPP terms, India is the third largest economy in the world. On GDP terms, India is, depending on the currency rate, either it is the 5th largest or the 6th largest economy in the world. So it's also driven by the fluctuating currency rates. India and UK compete for the 5th and 6th spot, and then of course the top 4 countries are United States, China, Japan, Germany, and I think very soon India will be, on a nominal GDP, the number 5 economy in the world.
So, how attractive is the Indian market as it targets the 5 trillion and then further to 10 trillion in terms of, if you look at the foreign direct investment that has been coming in to India, and I'm going to put that chart next. So, the foreign exchange reserves over the period of from 2012 to 2020 and beyond, as the number keeps growing. I think 2021, we just got the number that we may have, that is India may have crossed or touched $600 billion. So I have the chart in front of me, sir. Please go ahead.
Right. Thank you. So when you take a look at the foreign exchange, foreign currency reserves, why foreign currency reserves are important? Foreign currency reserves are the reserve dollars, which is used for 2 purposes. One, it is the reserve which is used for meeting all the import requirements. So when you import goods, you spend in dollars or you spend in euros, but normalized to dollars. And then you have exports, you earn back the dollars. The fact that India is still, there is a little bit of a deficit between almost close to 5 to 6%. It used to be 10 to 20% deficit between the imports and exports. The fact that they have narrowed the difference, and the whole concept of Make in India program is not to import every little item that India can produce on its own. From light bulbs to refrigerators to air conditioners to cars to mobile phones, etc. So India believes that it can make in India, and in the process save precious foreign exchange reserves, which should be used for all contingent expenses. The fact that India is today a 600 billion, confirmed by the Reserve Bank governor, tells you also that it is a net creditor. India's private debt is close to 540, 550, depending on again the currency rates, is about 550. If your reserve is about 600 billion, so in other words, you have more money in the bank account, even discounting for the debt. Debt is basically you borrow money for meeting various obligations, not only obligations in terms of imports, but also obligations to meet your domestic economic expansion. So even on that front, I think India has done well. If you recall, in the days India used to run, whenever its foreign exchange reserves dipped, it used to run to Bank of England with a pot of gold and then pledge the gold and then eventually repay the debt and bring back the gold. So a crisis of a magnitude, smaller magnitude that Sri Lanka is experiencing, where it finds that it has got a debt that it is not able to service, and it fell into the hands of the Chinese. So even on this is a very important indication that a developing economy has good reserves. A country like United States has very low reserves, and the reason being that it is the base currency. So everybody trades in United States dollar. So therefore, its reserves are relatively smaller. The top five countries in the world, China tops the list around 3.5, $3.6 trillion. Japan is number two. Switzerland is number three. Then you have, if I'm correct, Russia is number four, and India is number five. Russia is number four, is in that position by virtue of huge amount of oil. Or Russia and India kind of compete for the fourth position. Now, India may have pipped Russia into the fourth position. So that's one parameter in terms of understanding that there is a lot of foreign currency reserves that India holds and keeps it in good state. The second is the point that Sree touched on. There's a lot of money flowing in, and which called as the foreign direct investments. These go into funding companies. When Modi took over, the foreign direct investments were around the 45 billion mark. This is annual money flowing either directly into the stocks or into things like startup ecosystem or into companies for private placement acquisition or alternate investments going into private companies which are not publicly listed. So you are publicly listed, you have startup, and you have privately managed companies. The investments go into this company. This doesn't include all the capital programs, which is part of the Make in India program. That's a separate category. That is what we call trade in investments. So when you take a look at that number, it's gone from 45, and in the chart you will see 73.4. In the DGI, we have communicated to you that India's foreign direct investments in 2020 crossed $83 billion. $83 billion. Of course, it is relatively smaller when you compare it to 130, 125 billion that China receives, but $83 billion is a big number, is a reflection that there is sentiments and positive sentiments to invest in India to harness the growth that is imminent as it marches towards the 5 trillion economy. So these are the two parameters that we use to judge whether there is business confidence and there is confidence in international global investors, reserves, and FDI.
So let's just play it out, sir. What has been happening in the past 18 months? India gets buffeted by this COVID virus. Then India also gets tension at the borders, and India moves swiftly to ban a lot of software products which it felt would compromise on its national security that were made by China. And India also said that we are not going to import from China, we are going to source it ourselves. Great objectives. For all these things, what you need is an effective stocks market where a transparent price discovery is possible. Now, if you take a look at the market cap of India's markets, how does that compare with, say, markets of the West, and how do you see that going, sir?
India has rapidly evolved into what we call as the 3 trillion market club. So the market capitalization of the stock market of India is 3 trillion. So it's right in the top 10. Right above that is the more mature markets like Canada, France, UK, which make up what we call as the sub 4 trillion market cap club, which is 3.1 to 3.7. Canada is 3.1, France is 3.3, and UK is 3.7. Then when you look above, you have Japan at 6.7 and Hong Kong at 7. Look at these markets. These markets have been private markets for a long, long time relative to India. So it is again a reflection that India is slowly evolving to a very well organized private market club with people to come in and invest, and more companies to come and invest and get listed in either Bombay Stock Exchange or the National Stock Exchange. These are two big stock exchanges where you can list and basically trade. So again, the markets are the market sentiments are positive, and some of the FDI is directly going into the well capitalized companies which operate and report their earnings through the stock exchanges. So again, very positive and very positive sentiments and some distance to go. But India may see its market capitalization of 5 trillion achieved faster than the 5 trillion economy. So we may see the rapid rate at which it will advance. Typically, the market capitalization and the GDP almost runs in parallel on a 1-to-1 ratio. But in India's case, India may see more advanced or much faster climb towards that.
Well, the articles that have been appearing in PGurus for the past 2-3 years, if you remember, all that I have concentrated on. This is Sridharji is, he's been with us for about a year now. But before that, all have been to try and bring about this power of the stock market to the people, so that everybody, whether it is in India or outside, know and believe and trust that these exchanges are capable of being transparent and they can provide the true price discovery of anyone who wants to go and list their product in the stock exchange. So let's take a look at the development programs that underpin the Modi agenda. For example, agriculture, reforms and growth. What are your thoughts on where that is headed, sir?
See, the agro reforms has seen much. There are two components to it. One is the reorchestration of the agro industry. The second is the concept of subsidies and the concept of the buyback from the farmers. So there is a guaranteed, India has a guaranteed buyback program from the farmers at premium rates, or they're called as MSP. And so this has been one of the areas of contention, which is namely that one should not privatize the markets, where people can, buyers and sellers or growers and buyers can seamlessly meet, agree on a price, and then trade on it. To me, that's a very efficient market making mechanism. There are controls that government tries to put in place, and this is one of the contentious areas, be it United States, be it China, be it Japan, be it India, which is to protect no imports, but to protect the farmers of the land, because they are the food barons, produce the basic material, the basic things that make up a human being's living. So India still has a lot of subsidies, but when you take a look at on the procurement side, I think India has done the reforms will eventually come into place, notwithstanding a couple of states not being compliant. But when you take a look at the whole agro market ecosystem reform, it is good to see that they have a PLI program, or what they call as the program linked incentive schemes, putting money, government itself putting money into the agro program, and then attracting capital from overseas. For example, Israel is one of the major players paying in this space. So what are they doing? They've got, I think, access to 12 to 15 states and probably about 29 districts. We covered this in the PGI program. What are they doing? One is drip irrigation, the better seed, better farming, and the ability to produce higher yield from the same block of land. Then to use the seasonal patterns appropriately, cleaning of the rivers, cleaning of the de-weeding of the rivers. So they are involved in a number of programs, and very soon we'll also have things such as logistics, storage, refrigeration, quarantine. Many items were not exportable because India didn't have very efficient quarantine, very efficient packaging, very efficient transportation system. Today, I go back in just in the United States, but take a look at the last 25 to 30 years related to what is today, pretty much everything is available that you can get in India, from mangoes and fruits and flowers and garlands and anything that you can think of, very nicely packed and delivered. So agro is very much, they want to target a growth of 14 to 15% annualized, and that can come both from capital as well as harnessing through very efficient programs by people coming in and changing and re-architecting the agro ecosystem.
And if we take a look at the infrastructure that India has been building, you have seen some stupendous growth, whether it is border fortifications or roads, bridges, waterways, ports and river systems, etc. So this part also has had torrid growth in all for a good cause, of course, because India needed to get that infrastructure so that as its businesses scale up, it has the capacity to get things in a faster time period. Sir, anything you want to add on that, sir?
There are only two specific points that I would like to make. In the event of a crisis, infrastructure becomes very pivotal in moving things from point A to point B, because you do not want to have a paralysis. Any Indian would notice that the infrastructure India built on its borders, both during the period of Mr. Modi and even prior, there was infrastructure, but enhanced considerably during under his period. And it's called what you call just in time or on demand infrastructure that the army built to combat the Chinese in the Galwan Valley as well as across line of control is a very specific example of how the border roads organization has been able to meet the demands of the Indian defense forces from a security point of view. The second one that we have been extensively speaking about is India, when confronted with COVID, the railways became not only the shelters for hosting many sick people with temporary hospital beds. When the phase two wave or the second wave came, one of the critical things that was missing was the liquid medical oxygen, or LMO, is it called? By Jove, they moved liquid medical oxygen from across the country, crossing 10,000 metric tons over this very short period, carrying this from place to place across the country. Even during the cyclonic period, most recently in the northeastern region and in the west coast, the transportation did move. These are two specific examples of how far the infrastructure has been developed, as well as Indian Railways continues to be one of the critical locomotives that is moving India from, that is moving anything that India wants, be it grains, be it cars, be it vehicles, be it defense equipment, and be it medical supplies, to the extent that today railways is part of the medical supply chain.
And on the energy front, India has evolved as one of the most powerful venues for refining crude. Um, a little bit, perhaps you can shed light on energy from crude as well as other forms of energy such as wind and solar. How is India done in the last 7 years compared to perhaps before that? And how do you see this thing in the near future?
Energy sector was very much a closed sector in India. Again, under the Modi period, it used to be the largest Indian public sector undertaking was the Oil and Natural Gas Corporation, and there's a whole set of refineries that used to be that have been established from time immemorial. Whether it's Bharat Petroleum, whether it is Bangalore refineries, and whether it is Jamnagar refineries, all these refineries were part of the public sector undertaking, which is basically India is the third largest importer of crude in the world. So you get it in different forms. It has to be refined in the refinery, and the crude, then the refined crude, is used both for industrial purposes as well as for the commercial purposes. Commercial purposes being for transportation and logistics, be it air or be it um, the auto industry, right? It was not diluted. It's a highly capital intensive industry. Today, 35% of the refining is taking place in the public sector. Sorry, in the
In
United States,
private
you call
sector.
it in the private sector. In private sector, so 35% has been privatized, and today India processes 259 million 259 million barrels, and with an aspiration to grow to about 400 million by 2025. That's a significant number. This is one of the reasons why United States, the deal that was struck between United States and India resulted in the WTI Brent crude being received in India and refined, processed, either sent back to United States for export purposes or used in India for domestic consumption. So this is one of the big areas. The second area that you touched on, I'll be very brief, is the solar. India is a very, very, very big player in solar. They had 25 megawatts. They had set a goal of 40 megawatts by 2025. They have now almost at just at 40 million. 40 megawatts, and with an aspiration to take this to about 100. This is one of the reasons why the that India will achieve and meet the climate goals much earlier than either United States or Japan or China. India is a very big solar farm. And the contemplated investment in the solar in the energy sector in this solar energy sector is 100 to 150 billion dollars in the next 5 years. Mr. Kerry, who was in India, has committed that he will mobilize resources to make sure that India is one of the big models in the alternate energy sector.
And defense sector, India is really going forward with a lot of indigenization of projects. They're trying to make it on their own, which is a very important landmark, because then it is not dependent on anybody else. Plus, it doesn't have to expend its foreign currency to get or import weaponry. I just want to touch that because we have done many episodes with Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, and also in DGI we have talked about this. So there's a fair amount of stuff there. On mobile manufacturing also, India has the second largest manufacturers now. Auto sector, again, it is seeing a revival. Electronics and pharma is perhaps the most important now because of the fact that India's vaccine is now gaining acceptance across the world, with Brazil accepting Covaxin or approving Covaxin now. So India's own product, Covaxin, is now ready for export, because if one or two countries follow, then that is going to make a big sector. So if the contribution of pharma perhaps is going to be more than that of IT in the next decade. That's how I see it, sir. How do you see it?
Well, I think I tend to. IT has, it's today when you combine domestic as well as export. I think it's a $300 billion industry. It's growing at around 4% per year, which is by normal standards is a pretty good growth given the amount of money that is spent once you reach a saturation point, because it shifts to the alternate, for example, 5G, AI, it could be robotics. So there are new industries which require capital, and then that will then provide the next hockey stick ramp up in terms of the growth of the industry. So the traditional IT and IT services, I think India has reached a very critical point, or it has got a very stable base, and my dear friend Mr. Mohandas Pai would argue that we have 1.3 million engineers doing the plumbing on the IT side. We are the largest, one of the largest. No other country has, no other place in the world has this many, with a captive audience of another 3 to 4 million people in other adjacent industries in the IT. So I think, as you point out, the pharma is going to be one of the big sectors. The simple reason being, this COVID is here. Okay, whether we accept or not, the COVID is here, and we have already seen multiple variants of COVID coming into play. So, in other words, the world is acutely short of vaccines, acutely short. And India is the largest producer of vaccines in the world, and a number of it is used domestic, and components, some of it is also exported. But here we are going to see, with COVID coming in, India is going to have at least 10 leading brands besides two domestic brands, which is the Covishield and Covaxin. Covaxin is all Indian. Covishield is a partnership with AstraZeneca and Oxford, British. So therefore, you will be going to see huge growth coming from the pharma sector. This is identifying this. Again, this is one of the areas where Prime Minister has launched this PLI program. We have covered this in DGI. We have J&J, we have Pfizer, we have Eli Lilly, we have Sputnik. Russia wants India to manufacture many vaccines. So to me, that's one of the areas. Pharma is not just vaccines alone. Pharma is also other types of formulations and medications. So India today, once upon a time, India was not an FDA approved vendor. Today, it produced medication to a number of areas. One is your diabetic, rheumatic arthritis, for your blood pressure. So a number of pharmaceutical formulations and medicines and tablets also is now coming from India with the maturation of the industry and with capital coming in. People forget that hydroxychloroquine, which otherwise would have been a great immunobooster to mitigate, India is the largest producer of hydroxychloroquine. We won't get into the topic of Dr. Fauci and hydroxychloroquine. That probably reserved for another day. So to respond to your question, pharma is a big area. And as you rightly point out, this could be pharma, mobile, refining, then electronics, auto. These are some of the areas where you're going to see, multiple changes. Defense is another area because India is not yet exporting. There's only limited. BrahMos is being exported to some extent. There's MiG being exported. Tejas, the Indian version, is also being exported. So we may begin to see more exports coming even in the defense sector.
And in trade, sir, India's exports are expected to start increasing more and more. How do you see the trade? Plus, if India becomes a net exporter over a consistent period of time, that is going to put pressure on the rupee to start appreciating vis-a-vis the standard, which is the dollar. And if that should happen, then essentially the 5 trillion mark can be reached even faster.
Indeed, I think India is retooling its trade, bilateral trade. It had the restrictive policies has hindered its ability. Now, India has working on a both FTA free trade agreement with Europe, and is also working on an investment agreement, that is the FDI, with Europe. For example, if we take the bilateral trade between EU and India is close to 69 or 70 billion euros, which if you translate it, roughly around 85 billion dollars. If we take Britain, which has unbundled itself, that's another 20 billion. So between EU and UK, you can easily see $100 billion of bilateral trade growing to potentially grow to about 150 or even $200 billion as more of these components, more of these things which are manufactured gets consumed. We also, one of the other biggest partners is ASEAN. So ASEAN is going to be another big block where India has a trade partnership agreement. So to answer your question, India is likely to be a 500 to a trillion dollars. Is already, it's very. India wants to do just $500 billion with United States, leave alone the overall trade proposition. Today, India's bilateral trade with United States is around $170 billion today. In 5 years, it has a potential to double, given the ramp up that has happened, especially after the crude industry, after the refining and the trade deal struck between Trump and Modi ji. So if you continue on the refining, continue on some of the other sectors like pharma that you alluded to, so doubling that is not within the outside the realms. So to be a $1 trillion export import business model could certainly add to not five, but the eventual goal of a $10 trillion economy as India strives to get to that goal in a much faster fashion relative to the time and trajectory that it has taken to get to eventually when it gets to this $5 trillion.
And as far as social programs is concerned, I think this is one of the bright spots in the Modi regime, because you start from direct benefit scheme Jan Dhan Yojana, where he made sure that whatever subsidies that the government was giving would straight go without any loss to the consumer. That has really gone home. And I think social programs is one shining spot in his 7-year record. What are your thoughts, sir? And how do you see this going forward?
There are three specific programs that I'd like to touch on. One is this whole financial inclusion or the Jan Dhan Yojana mobile program. India, astonishing, added close to 400 million new accounts by giving each person this Aadhaar, giving mobile access, and a linked bank account to the mobile phone. So they can put money directly into the bank account of a much or well needed person. Here, you use a tax file number. There, the Aadhaar ID, which was developed and conceived and implemented during the Modi period, has become the platform. So 400 million new accounts and direct benefit transfers going in, completely eliminating the people in the middle. The second program that I'd like to touch on is giving the gas cylinder, so that mitigating the people, every household to have a gas. That's a very laudable program, because India, to be an aspiring nation, you can't have still people cooking in all kinds of old methods and models in the household. That program has had its hiccups, but it has seen a mass scale adoption. The third program that I would like to touch on is this pension scheme that has been introduced to all the people, irrespective of their economic background. So those who are earning have decent pensions, but they have introduced a pension minimum amount that every household gets, especially the rural population, which is where the per capita devailer is in India. If India's per capita is around $2,200, which has evolved from $1,600 during Mr. Modi's time, or evolved from less than $1,000, is purely because the rural population has not seen the upliftment, has not seen the economic benefit flow into the rural areas. That's one of the areas that very much the Modi government has focused on. Then the medical program, the medical insurance program, everybody has access to medical, so they can go to the hospitals and get treatment for some of the critical ailments and illness. So that's the other program that has received. Now, both these programs, the direct deposit program, the medical program, plus they were also able to leverage this and give food to people, vast number of people in India during the COVID crisis. Just yesterday, India time, Modi ji announced that he is giving free food to 80 crore people. That's 800 million people till Diwali. If you recall that there used to be this little package, a pack of rice, lentils, oil, plus I don't know whether they were giving one single vegetable, was part of the package that was distributed to every household.
that is those who are in needy. So 800 million people to be given free food is again a very laudable social program, some of which we are beginning to see in United States today. We are seeing those programs today. The child welfare program that is here, the unemployment insurance to a vast number of people, the farming loans to the people, etc. What India has done, we are beginning to see here in the United States. These are some of there's about 25 programs that has been launched. They're all in the different stages of aging and maturation, but some of them have really taken off and beginning to make a material impact around the per capita of the country. It is not without its faults, it is not without its blemishes. India is a vast and complicated country. Remember, India is also very similar to the United States, is home to a number of illegal immigrants.
So, if I have to kind of trace India's growth, up until 2014, India was perhaps crawling, but from 2014 up until now, it is beginning to walk. And it is not long before it is going to start jogging, and then it will start running, and perhaps it will start, galloping after that. So this is how we see it, because that's what the data tells us. I know there's a lot of you who are going to give this, that, but remember that if you want to rebut this, please do so with data. Thank you very much, Sridhar ji, for taking the time to put down all the data and give your prognosis on where India is headed. And I think India has seen the worst, and it's the worst is behind in terms of like how many things can you hit a country with. I think it has taken a lot of hits, and then it has still continued to stand. I think that's how I see it. And let's see how this thing plays out. Thank you very much for doing the research for this, sir. And it's very, very impressively put together, even if I say so myself. I know people come to PGurus for some specific information. We hope you found what you're looking for. Thank you very much, Sridhar ji. Namaskar.
Thank you, and have a wonderful day, and look forward to seeing you again.